Against expectations, Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan did exceedingly well on its release in 1982. Who knew that if you had a good script, strong villain and tight direction that you'd end up with a great film? So a sequel was a given.
But if there's even a chance that Spock has an eternal soul...
First you'd have to address the Vulcan in the room. Star Trek III The Search for Spock.
This entire crew seems on the edge of obsessive behavior concerning Mr. Spock.
Star Trek II had done really well for Paramount. It did make less money than the first Star Trek film, but also cost way less, so in the end it was far more profitable. And as far as the studio was concerned, that's far more important. Even with less box office, they made more money on a cheaper film, and that became the magic formula: cheap space adventures.
Con bloodsucker!
So almost immediately after the film's release, Paramount instructed Star Trek II's producer, Harve Bennett, to begin work on a sequel, ideally for a 1984 release. And keep it fairly cheap, Harve. If it's cold in the house, put on a jacket. We're not made of money. Former television producer Bennett would write the script himself, but there were still two major issues to deal with. Who would direct, and how would they pop a Spock on it? The answer to both issues was the same.
Mr. Scott, have you always multiplied your repair estimates by a factor of 4?
Certainly, sir. How else can I keep my reputation as a miracle worker?
When meeting with studio executives about what it would take to bring Nimoy back to Star Trek, the actor said,
"You know, I'd like to direct."
Paramount's rep immediately agreed and then excused himself for a moment to collect a blank contract from the trunk of his car. After waiting several hours in a dark office for the executive to return, Nimoy went home and waited. After chasing up Paramount several times about directing the movie, the studio eventually ran out of deflections, distractions and excuses and eventually went screw it and hired Nimoy to direct. I mean, it's a great deal for Nimoy, who acts in the film, but of course older Spock is only in the film for a few scenes at the very end of the film. Nimoy had directed stage productions and a few TV episodes here and there. Actors directing episodes of series they appeared in wasn't unheard of, but it also wasn't all that common. William Shatner almost directed a Star Trek episode of the third season, and Nimoy may have had a crack had the show reached a fourth year. So Paramount had a director, and it had Spock back.
Then my presence is to our mutual advantage.
Going back to Wrath of Khan for a moment.
Aren't you dead?
Spock being killed was not due to a contractual demand from Leonard Nimoy, but it was used as a way by Harve Bennett to tempt a hesitant Nimoy into returning for that one movie. You see, actors love playing death scenes. Spock's death originally appeared early on but was moved to the end of the film, which may be why Spock plays such a limited role throughout much of that movie. Leonard Nimoy had enjoyed making the second film so much that he would regret killing Spock off, and so a few hooks were added just in case they wanted to continue.
Remember,
Now that they actually were continuing, and in a film called The Search for Spock, just how would that work? Star Trek III follows on directly but not quite directly from Star Trek II Wrath of Khan.
The death of Spock is like an open wound.
Anywho, on their way home, some of the crew are reassigned while the damaged ship limps into space dock. Defeating Khan was a hard mission. It's managed to age everyone, let's say 2 years. The whole Genesis bizzo has turned into a hot potato that no amount of butter and sour cream will make palatable. Starfleet has also decided to mothball the Enterprise rather than refit it.
Jim, the Enterprise is 20 years old.
Admiral Kirk can't understand Starfleet's rationale. He himself has had some very fine times inside things that are 20 years old. Starfleet, however, is thinking of their futuristic flagship, the shiny new Excelsior. Dr. McCoy, however, isn't quite feeling himself. Apparently he's got an unwanted mental squatter, Spock's Katra, which sounds awfully like the contents of Spock's brain.
Brain and brain! What is brain?
You're supposed to pop a Spock on it, not in it. Meanwhile, science vessel Grissom is investigating the Genesis planet, but so far have found no trace of Phil Collins, and the only Peter Gabriel material they can find are some of his solo albums from the early 2000s. Lieutenant Saavik and Kirk's now unestranged son David Marcus beam down to investigate unexpected signs of life on the Genesis planet. Meanwhile, Klingon Commander Kruge buys a stolen report on Project Genesis and sees its value as a superweapon that he's determined to control. Kruge destroys the Grissom, marooning the landing party. Before Klingon troops capture the pair as hostages, Saavik and David have found a small Vulcan boy on the planet. I wonder who that could be, because if it isn't who I think it is, then it's a really big coincidence. David Marcus was co-creator of Genesis, and it seems he may have fudged things slightly.
I used protomatter.
An unstable substance which every ethical scientist in the galaxy has denounced as dangerously unpredictable.
No shit, Saavik. The Genesis planet is unstable and will go, technical term, foom boom, in a very short while. The rapidly decaying planet is also quickly aging up the Vulcan boy, which means they need to get off the planet ASAP if they don't want to deal with a surly Vulcan teen asking for the keys to the shuttlecraft.
The word, sir? The word is no. I am therefore going anyway.
How many fingers do I have up?
That's not very damn funny.
Your sense of humor's returned.
The hell it is.
Kirk's mission: break McCoy out of custody, steal the Enterprise, head off to the Genesis planet, collect Spock's body, and head to Vulcan so Spock's spirit and body can be reunited. I mean, that was obvious.
The Genesis effect has in some way regenerated Captain Spock.
But they hadn't expected Kruge, who, to show he means business, has one of the 3 hostages on the planet killed.
Admiral, David is dead.
Kirk is saddened by the death of his son, so close to his first Father's Day as a dad. Kirk had dropped hints that he was really looking forward to a jar of super hot chili sauce and an Old Spice gift pack. All for naught.
I swear to you, we're not finished yet.
Kirk and crew abandoned the ship after surrendering it to the Klingons.
But the bridge seems to be run by computer. It is the only thing speaking.
Let me hear.
6, 5.
On the surface of the rapidly deteriorating planet, Kirk and Kruge face off in a brawl. Kirk and Spock, the latter conveniently having reached more or less the same age as when he died, beam up to the Klingon ship.
Help us or die.
I do not deserve to live.
Fine, I'll kill you later.
The Enterprise crew commandeer the Klingon bird of prey and head to Vulcan, where everything is tied up with a nice, neat bow. McCoy is his old self, and Spock is back, baby.
Your name is Jim.
It's a smaller stakes story. It's really about the lengths Kirk will go to for his friends, restoring Spock and saving McCoy's sanity, rather than the potential for Kruge running off with Genesis. Not like that. Kruge is just there to complicate things.
Absent friends.
Without McCoy and Spock, Kirk invites Sulu, Uhura, and Chekov for a drink. The cynic in me believes this is the first time any of them have been anywhere near Kirk's apartment. Not present, Scotty, who does know where Kirk's apartment is, since he routinely drops by in the middle of the night, leaving a flaming bag of dog shit on the front step. McCoy's brain is scrambled from fighting with Spock, leading him to be confined for his own safety. Spock's father, Sarek, appears, first believing his son had mind-melded with Kirk, but after putting everything together, we get one of the film's best sequences where Kirk and his reduced crew recover McCoy and steal the Enterprise, leaving a hobbled Excelsior in its wake.
Kirk, you do this, you'll never sit in the captain's chair again.
Warp speed.
Souvenirs from one surgeon to another. I took them out of her main transwarp computer drive.
William Shatner gives us one of his best performances as Kirk here. He's trying to deal with the loss of his longtime offsider Spock, and possibly McCoy, and his ship being decommissioned. Then, in one of his single best scenes ever, he reacts to his son's death.
Ambassador killed my son.
Even though Spock's name is in the title, this is a Captain Kirk film. William Shatner dominates almost every scene he's in.
I tend to recommend you all for promotion in whatever fleet we end up serving.
At the time of this film, his weekly series T.J. Hooker had taken off. Starring in a weekly action series is a grind, with fewer opportunities to do much in the way of good acting.
Just to make it interesting.
So seeing Kirk run the gamut of emotions in this film was great.
Klingon bastard, you've killed my son.
Even though the rest of the cast technically have a bigger role, or at least a few more lines, we'd have to wait for the next film to actually see them fleshed out in an ever so slightly more meaningful way.
Don't get smart, Tiny.
Here, Mr. Sulu gets to flip a douchebag.
Don't call me Tiny.
Scotty sabotages the ship that might replace the Enterprise.
Up your shaft.
Uhura pulls a phaser on an annoying co-worker and locks him in a cupboard. We've all been there, especially once they start casually talking about a marvelous opportunity for a timeshare.
The old adrenaline going, huh? Good boy. Now get in the closet.
And Chekov is dressed like he's just come from a failed audition for Jersey Boys.
We're losing precious time.
Scanning. Indications negative at this time. Did I get it right?
Deforest Kelley gets to channel Spock in a joyous way, while replacement Saavik Robin Curtis actually plays her character like a Vulcan, which is not that hard when you consider who was directing. Why no Kirstie Alley? Apparently her agent quoted a much higher fee to appear, and so the role was recast.
How many have paid the price for your impatience? How many have died? How much damage have you done? And what is yet to come?
Mark Leonard is back as Sarek, a role he last played in 1967. Merritt Buttrick also returns as David, aka Doomed David. The standout here is Christopher Lloyd as Klingon Commander Kruge. He was still a year away from appearing in Back to the Future, and at the time was best known for playing Reverend Jim in the sitcom Taxi. Even though his name was in comedy, he got the role, and while he's no Khan, he's certainly a memorable villain, owning every scene he's in.
It's just a turn of luck I have been waiting for.
Ruthless, dishonorable, ill-tempered, and ready to kill at the drop of a hat.
May I suggest? Say the wrong thing, Torg!
It probably wouldn't hurt if he kept to a maximum of 2 cups of Ractogino a day, or at least decaf. You might be thinking that bird of prey with a cloaking device seems awfully like a Romulan warbird. Well, early ideas featured Romulans in the story. Nimoy thought Klingons would be more cinematic. There were also meant to be more of them in order to show that Kruge was both a renegade and a badass, even among Klingons.
Now to show that my intentions are sincere, I shall kill one of the prisoners.
Instead of him being a Klingon outlier, Kruge would become the default template for most Klingons we would see going forward. With Spock aging so rapidly, it was only natural that he'd experience a bout of Pon farr, apparently cured by holding hands with Saavik. I mean, we cut away before anything else happens, but while it's not mentioned in this or the next film, there was talk that Saavik was supposed to have gotten pregnant as a result. Huh? There are a couple of familiar faces in small roles from Trek and other things. Him, Yeoman Rand, Trouble Man, OCP up-and-comer Bob Morton, that SWAT guy from Hill Street Blues, but also under the Klingon makeup is John Larroquette.
You said you would kill me.
I lied.
Harve Bennett knew that in order for people to accept Spock's resurrection, Kirk couldn't have everything going his own way.
David, what went wrong?
I went wrong.
David Marcus had to die, so it transpires he cheated by using unstable material in the Genesis project.
Klingon, best.
Killing off a son that Kirk barely knew wasn't enough.
Code 000. Destruct. 0.
The Enterprise is scuttled in a ploy to defeat the Klingons, at least for a few minutes. Of course, while he was no longer actively involved in the production, Star Trek's creator Gene Roddenberry was again more than a little annoyed at the Enterprise being sacrificed in this way.
My God, Bones. What have I done? What you had to do. What you always do. Turn death into a fighting chance to live.
We would get used to seeing new versions of Enterprise over time, but at the time of this movie, this was for fans, if not a gut punch on the level of losing Spock, it was at the very least the equivalent of whacking your knee hard into the side of the desk. Maybe folks didn't realize just how much the ship was an actual character in Star Trek until it died. Perhaps there weren't too many fans who named their kids NCC 1701, or not too many of them attending conventions cosplaying as the ship, perhaps because getting in and out of elevators would suck big time. But still, the death of Enterprise hurt.
You're suffering from a Vulcan mind meld, Doctor.
That green-blooded son of a bitch. It's his revenge for all those arguments he lost.
Star Trek II's success did bring a slightly larger budget, but money was still tight. Excelsior's interior is cobbled together from various bits and bobs. Enterprise and Grissom use the same bridge set. The production did give us a look at the submarine-like bird of prey bridge, which of course was yet another set assembled from bits of other sets. The entirety of Vulcan and the Genesis planet were created on sound stages for the element of control. In a sound stage, you can control the elements, the lighting, the wind, whether it rains or snows. While on location, you're at the mercy of the weather. That's the theory. So the soundstage caught fire, threatening to engulf sets and delay filming. By all accounts, actor William Shatner helped get the fire under control. By William Shatner's own account, he heroically and personally saved the day by preventing the set from being enveloped in flame. Mr. Shatner's memoirs are always entertaining, even if the emphasis on the lead character, William Shatner, may not in fact 100% match actual events. Like those advanced mathematics textbooks sold by Uncle Reg's publishing company that had removed all mentions of the number 9 for being too, quote, magical. Composer James Horner returned for Part 3, with a soundtrack that often quotes his score for Star Trek II. But as that was one of the better scores, no one's complaining too hard about that. Star Trek III didn't reuse too much footage from older films, apart from material recapping the events of Spock's death, and of course they got a little more mileage from ILM's groundbreaking Genesis Project footage. Star Trek III gave us a bunch of new vessels, including this one, which the Klingons destroyed, and the USS Grissom, which the Klingons destroyed. Search for Spock gave us a Klingon bird of prey complete with cloaking device and the fancy new space dock orbiting Earth. Industrial Light and Magic returned to provide the effects, and indeed if you look at the Trek films with the best visuals, ILM's name would be in the credits. Their work on the destruction of the Enterprise is excellent. It's a fitting end to a ship, but not the end of the line for the name.
This isn't reality. This is fantasy.
Now, was there ever the remotest possibility that they wouldn't find Spock and restore him? Wasn't having the actor playing Spock directing the film also a bit of a giveaway? I don't think it really matters all that much. Star Trek III was very much about the journey. Like that time Auntie Beryl walked out of the jungle with that neat necklace made out of human teeth.
I know this will come as a pleasant surprise to you. Our ship was the victim of an unfortunate accident. Sorry about your crew, but as we say on Earth, c'est la vie.
So Star Trek III Search for Spock has a reputation of not being one of the good Star Trek films. This is purely down to the mental gymnastics required to make the joke work that the odd-numbered Trek films were a bit crap. Motion picture is dull, Star Trek V is bad, as is the 7th film Generations. Star Trek III's main problem is that for a very long time, all of the even-numbered films were excellent, and poor 3, merely being pretty good, came between the two most popular.
Because the needs of the one outweighed the needs of the many.
Despite its numerical handicap, Star Trek III is a pretty good and fun Star Trek film, one that would become the sandwich filler in between two far more popular Trek films, with all three forming a trilogy. In Star Trek III, the Enterprise was lost and Kirk and company mutinied in order to save Spock. In Star Trek IV, the crew would return home to face the music, but first would need to take a little detour through time.
I have had enough of you!
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Is it possible to artificially create identical human beings?